everyone, this is a tune from The Faith We Sing, number 2173, Shine, Jesus, Shine.
Good morning and welcome to worship this morning at Gethsemane United Methodist Church. We are glad you are here.
Hi everyone, this is a tune from The Faith We Sing, number 2040, Awesome God.
Power and love, our God is an awesome God.
A great teacher of mine once taught me that there are two types of problems that come up in church and in life. There are technical problems and there are adaptive challenges. Technical and adaptive. Now, technical problems are very simple. It's when my water heater breaks and, step one, I call my dad. I say, step two, Dad, my water heater is broken. Step three, my dad and I go to Home Depot, we buy a new one, and we install it. That's a very easy problem to solve. There's an issue, there's a solution to that issue, and all it takes is some money and following the correct steps. Now, granted, these problems can also go horribly awry, even when the water heater leaks a little bit after the installation, there's still a system and an order of steps you can continually do to try and fix it. Now, adaptive challenges are much more complex. An adaptive challenge usually involves people. And people will never act the way you think they will. A great example of an adaptive challenge is marriage. Not because marriage is bad or a problem, but because when you get married, suddenly everything doubles. Two people enter into the relationship with a whole host of behaviors and habits that are completely the opposite of how the other one does things. Like, how do you squeeze your toothpaste? How do you fold your towels? Or do you put the toilet paper roll over or under? How do you organize your dresser? Do you organize your dresser? Or think of holidays. You grow up doing Christmas the same way every year. And everyone in your family plans accordingly, and then suddenly you get married and you have a whole nother set of traditions to contend with. And both people need to adapt, and both people probably won't get exactly what they want, and their spouse probably won't get exactly what they want, but people adapt. Adaptive challenges, things need to change in order to move forward. All of these things are adaptive challenges. They're not straightforward as following steps 1, 2, 3, and then you're done. And these types of problems have a before and an after. They require a change. They require you to change and bend and adapt. And the way you solve an adaptive challenge is by communicating and being flexible. Because when your spouse puts the dishes in the dishwasher the wrong way, it isn't because they're attacking you and doing it out of spite. That's just how they do it. And when we can address that fear of being attacked and communicate our needs and their needs, we can find common ground to move forward. Which brings us to our text this morning. Because when I read it, I saw Jesus dealing with two different types of problems, one technical and one adaptive. Our text this morning is Mark 5, verse 21 through 43. When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed against him. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak because she thought, "If I just touch his clothes, I will be healed." Immediately her bleeding stopped and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "and yet you can ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. "Your daughter is dead," they said. "Why bother the teacher anymore?" Overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, "Do not be afraid, just believe." He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion, with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, "Why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep." But they laughed at him. After he put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." Immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. At this they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this, and told them to give her something to eat. For Scripture in, among, and beyond us. Thanks be to God. If you remember a few weeks ago, if you can remember that far, I talked about how Mark, the gospel writer, used this literary tool that scholarly folk call a Markan sandwich. And we have another one this week. Our story began with Jairus asking Jesus to save his daughter and falling at Jesus' feet. And then we have this interjected story of the hemorrhaging woman. And finally the section ends back with Jairus' daughter. Although this one does seem to have a much better flow to it. But we get the sense that Jesus arrived in a town and everyone is swarming him. Then there's this urgent mission to heal Jairus' daughter, so the whole crowd rushes along with Jesus towards Jairus' house. And it's at that moment, in that chaos, that we have the story of the bleeding woman. And if you aren't Jesus or this bleeding woman, this is the worst timing. It's like when you're already running late to church, you sit down in your car and you go to put the key in the ignition, you realize you don't have it, it's still in the house, and you have to get out and go run inside and get it again. It's just another thing that's getting in the way of this urgent mission of where you're trying to go. But it's at this moment when this woman touches Jesus' cloak that he stops. And suddenly, the Jesus who always seems to know what everyone is thinking is at a loss when he feels God the Father use him to heal someone. And Jesus makes a way. Jesus stops in the midst of the rush and the chaos to make a way for healing. We can imagine how the people surrounding Jesus felt when he halted in the middle of the road, kind of like a jerk reaction. We can imagine the disbelief as he calls out for this woman who the crowds have cast aside as eternally unclean, and we can maybe empathize with their thoughts of, shouldn't you be doing something more important with your time? But Jesus stops because he has run into an adaptive challenge. The scholar William Lane writes this about the bleeding woman. She had consulted a number of physicians, had endured a wide variety of treatments, and had spent all her money in a desperate attempt to better her condition. All this was in vain. In fact, her condition grew worse. Her existence was wretched because she was in a constant state of uncleanness, and would be generally shunned by people since contact with her rendered them unclean. Despite her ritual uncleanness, she entered the crowd behind Jesus and reached out to his garment. The desire to touch Jesus' clothing probably reflects the belief that the dignity and power of a person were transferred to what he wears. On this understanding, her touch combined faith with quasi-magical notions which were widespread in that day. And so Jesus' adaptive challenge is to confront this woman's belief that it was his clothes that made her well and not her faith. And so this interaction that Jesus has with this woman involves her overcoming her fear that makes her tremble to confess the whole truth of her beliefs to Jesus the Christ, who responds to this challenge with the words, "Your faith has healed you. Your faith has healed you. Go in peace. Jesus emphasizes her faith as the factor for God's healing, not any snake oil belief or superstition about his clothes. Even in the midst of the busyness of life and death, Jesus creates a space for healing. In the midst of the chaos of life, Jesus makes a way. It's at this moment the messengers came to inform everyone that Jairus' daughter had passed. Jesus was too late because he was dealing with this shunned woman. And Mark, the author, perfectly juxtaposes this woman's faith and the messenger's lack of faith. Our Mark sandwich ends with life, not just for the young girl who died, but for the woman who was marginalized by her society. Mark puts these two stories together because the ideas of faith, healing, and life are all interconnected. And what it means to live and to die depend on your social, political, and physical situation. In this story, Jesus creates a way for healing. He heals the technical problem of a dead girl just reaching the beginning of her adult life. And he corrects the adaptive challenge of connecting faith in the divine with superstitions that have nothing to do with the divine. Jesus makes a way. This last week was the Minnesota Annual Conference, but we had it on Zoom. So Sean Bixler and I got to spend part of our weeks listening to the happenings of our conference over the last year in the midst of COVID, in the midst of unrest, and in the midst of uncertainty. And it was in that uncertainty that our conference leaders decided that we needed to see Jesus as a waymaker. And that was our theme, Jesus, Waymaker. In his Episcopal address, our Bishop David Bard preached, "Our experience of the past 15 months has brought us face to face with the dimensions of trauma that we have too long and too often ignored, and brought fresh occasions for trauma. We are becoming more aware of racialized trauma and its long history. An essential part of the work of racial reckoning, of anti-racism, is to listen to and acknowledge these stories of trauma and the ripple effects through time. Friends, this is essential work on our journey with Jesus. And by listening to these stories of trauma, it will help us get to a place where we can discuss solutions for this epidemic for which there is no vaccine." Bishop Bard is reflecting on Jesus' encounter with the Syrophoenician woman, another woman who had been an outcast of her people, who was shunned by the general public. And in this adaptive challenge of Jesus' reckoning with the systems of exclusion in his day and age, we can see the same reckoning needs to happen in ours. Jesus said in his Sermon on the Mount, chapter 7, verse 3, "Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, 'Let me take that speck out of your eye,' when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite! First take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye." The challenges that we face in our world, in our country, and in our churches are adaptive challenges. I'll quote Bishop Bard once again. "We live in a time where adaptive change is needed in the church and in the world, and the essence of adaptive change is learning. We need to learn. We need to be open to the new, and we need to be willing to cross boundaries as we draw maps of where we are and where we need to go." My friends, this conversation of mission and moving forward begins with healing. And much like we see in our text today, healing can and healing will occur in the busyness and chaos of everyday lives. We need to simply have faith and reach out to the one who heals all. We need to recognize that we face adaptive challenges and not simply technical problems. We need to lean into our trauma, touch our grief, center it with gratitude that our Christ is our healer, and ask Jesus to make a way for healing. This is the last time I'll quote our bishop, I promise. He said to us on Wednesday morning, Because this story has a happy ending, and we love happy endings, we can ignore that we get there through some heartbreak. Our hearts should break with the woman, this caring mother whose child is traumatized by the demonic. The story before us is a wonderful picture of such a journey, from pain to brokenheartedness to tenderness. Jesus makes a way for that journey. Our church needs to be on such a journey, and we need to be willing to accompany people on such a journey. Broken hearts are hearts broken open to be enlarged, to be made more capacious. Our broken hearts are hearts to be broken open to become more spacious. Our relationship with Jesus the Christ opens us up to love more deeply, especially to those who are marginalized by the systems that we have created. We are present in this scene that Mark describes. We can be Jairus, asking for healing of one we love. We can be his daughter lying on a deathbed. We can be the crowd or the disciples crowding Jesus, wanting to witness what is going on. We can be the woman suffering for years, carrying our trauma and holding hope beyond hope that by simply touching Jesus' cloak we will be healed. We can be messengers from the synagogue, pronouncing someone or something dead too soon. Our church and our world are facing adaptive challenges. Christ calls us to hold our trauma and grief in one hand and our faith and healing in the other. And when we do this, we create space for healing and grace in the midst of an urgent and busy world. And when we reach out to Jesus in those moments, Jesus makes a way. Amen.
Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, let me stand. I am tired, I am weak, I am worn. Through the storm, through the night, lead me on to the light. Take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home. When my way grows drear, precious Lord, linger near. When my life is almost gone, hear my cry, hear my call. Hold my hand, lest I fall. Take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home. When the darkness appears and the night draws near, and the day is past and gone, at the river I stand, guide my feet, hold my hand, take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home.
Thank you for joining us for worship today. God send you, the Spirit fill you, Christ go with you, and you with Christ always and everywhere. Go in peace.